Chancellor Sutton.
Hi everybody, I'm Ed Sutton and I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad to see that a middle-aged man talking about sex for an hour and 10 minutes last week didn't run anybody off. I see it might have brought in a few new faces. Well, we finally labored our way up to step 5, and just to review a little bit, step 1 is about honesty. Step 2 is about open-mindedness. Step 3 is about willingness. Step 4 that we spent 3 weeks on is about courage. The courage to face what's wrong with us, what's wrong within myself that I don't like, that's not producing results in my life that are acceptable to me and to other people. Now, in step 5, we're faced with the word integrity. And integrity has to do with purity, or a rigid adherence to a code of moral principles. You know, how am I going to live my life? How am I going to practice these principles? You know, am I going to do it the way I want to, or the way the instructions tell me to? You know, am I going to take a risk and share my innermost self with another human being, or am I going to keep it to myself and see if I can choke it down before it gets me drunk again? Let's turn to page 72 in the big book. Chapter 5 dealt with step 3 and step 4. Chapter 6 deals with step 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The instructions on the steps 5 through 11 are rather brief, being condensed into one chapter, but nevertheless the information in there is easily understood and is power-packed. You know, if you take the time to take a look at it and see what myself or yourself needs to do in order to follow the directions. It says, having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? And Bill finally gets around to telling us what in the world we've been trying to do up to this point, and he says we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. So a new attitude, my old attitude was that everything was wrong. My new attitude has to be about God, myself, and other people, and about what is right and not what is wrong. I have to turn my thinking around. When I turn my thinking around, my attitudes are different. A new relationship with my Creator. And the relationship that I started out with was simply that, as it says in step 4, or in chapter 4, we agnostics, that either God is everything or else He is nothing. Either He is or He isn't. What was my choice to be? And with no more explanation or idea about God than that, I was able to build an understanding of God that would work for me, and to discover the obstacles in my path. Those were to be revealed to me in the 4th step. You know, how had I been defeating myself through bad thinking, which produced bad feelings and bad actions? We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. And here's the reason for taking the fifth step. The best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. And the only reason I came in here was because I was terminally ill with the disease of alcoholism. And how it works that James just read for us, it says that half measures availed us nothing. And what am I willing to do to save my life? This book tells me if I follow these directions that my life will be saved one day at a time. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. So step 4 and 5 is the beginning of a house cleaning process. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. And, I was able early in my life to present that character. And the more I drank, the more garbled that character became. And the character that I thought I was presenting as perceived by me was not perceived by people outside of myself. And I thought, why are these people mistreating me? Why are these people misunderstanding me? Why are these people retaliating against me? Why are these people firing me? Why are these people putting me in jail? Why are they telling me to come to court? Why are they doing all these things to me? And it was because what was going on in my head, I wasn't able to reproduce outside of myself in my life, even though I thought I was. It says in the doctor's opinion that after a while we cannot differentiate the true from the false, and I was in that trap. I didn't know what was going on in reality, only what was going on in my mind, which wasn't reality. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As far as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension that makes for more drinking. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We have spent thousands of dollars for examinations. I spent about 3 or 4 years of my life paying psychiatrists and psychologists trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I never let them put the finger on my drinking. My first wife tried to put the finger on my drinking, but I got out of it. I tried to convince the psychiatrist and the psychologist that what she was telling them really wasn't the facts. Let me tell you what's wrong with her. and why she thinks this, and how her mother was an alcoholic, and she sees her mother and me, etc., ad nauseum and ad nauseum. And it didn't make any difference whether they believed it or not. I believed it, and it blocked me from taking what these good medical people were telling me and putting into action in my life. We knew but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. But few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. We have seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. You know, I could have gotten well on $150. I could go see a psychologist 25 years ago for $20 an hour. You know, if I just listened to him and said, okay, I'll do that. You know, but my disease prevented me from doing that. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else, including me. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chances for recovery. I remember when I first started bleeding internally, and I suspected what was wrong with me, and it concerned me a little bit. I knew passing blood through every hole in my body except my ears probably wasn't a sign that I was in good health. And I went over to I guess it was B. Dalton over at Northwest Plaza, about half drunk, and I went and got a family medical encyclopedia, and I didn't have any doubt about what to look up, and I looked up cirrhosis of the liver, and I stood there in the bookstore and I read it, and it was a rather recent copyright. I checked that. I wanted to make sure I was getting good information, and all the symptoms that they described I had, and all what they said it felt like, I felt like it, and the last two sentences devoted themselves to describing how don't waste your time on someone with cirrhosis of the liver, because they never recover. It's no wonder that the medical profession has such a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance of recovery. You know, I wasn't about to go to a doctor with this internal bleeding business because I knew he would tell me to quit drinking. But I would go to B. Dalton to find out what was wrong with me. I had 2 heart attacks. First one I had when I was 36 years old. It was alcohol. It was, I don't know what it was. They misdiagnosed me as having a heart attack. What happened was my brain got so screwed up that my involuntary reflexes, or whatever they're called, didn't work right, and my brain forgot to tell my heart to beat. My EKG went all over the place, and I had classic heart attack symptoms, and they told me, the doctor told me, I don't want you to worry about this. You're in pretty bad shape, but you're probably not going to live through the night. But I said, that's okay. And I fooled them all. I woke up alive, and a couple of days he came back and he was taking a lifestyle history and all this shit. And I was single and didn't have any family in town, and I was all by myself in that hospital. He said, how much do you drink? And I said, oh, he's on to something now. What I'll do is I'll lie. And so I thought, I'll just make it something reasonable. And I said, well, I drink about a pint a day. He said, oh my gracious. I thought, what in the hell is wrong with this man? Small wonder many in the medical profession have such a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. You know, the doctors can't help us, but we can help each other. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom we take this intimate and confidential step. And remember, when this book was written, it was a 12-step tool that was to be sent out to a man all alone who was supposed to read this, follow the directions, go out and start his own fellowship so that he could save his life one day at a time. So when they're talking about finding the right person, this was in the days before everybody who came to Alcoholics Anonymous or who read this book had an opportunity to select or be assigned a sponsor. So there's the instructions in here about who to share this fifth step with is for that reason. Not necessarily, but normally we take the fifth step with our AA sponsor. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance for a closed mouth and understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family, but we cannot disclose anything to our wives or our parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. So, once again, don't concern yourself too much about that part of the directions. You may want to go outside of AA for certain parts of your fifth step if you have good reason to do so, but at least start with an AA sponsor. You hear all kinds of stories about people doing things that may or may not benefit them, like getting a Greyhound bus ticket to Denver, Colorado, and giving their fifth step to the guy sitting next to them on the way out there, boring somebody to death. Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. If that is so, this step may be postponed. Only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. And, there are many times in the steps where the opportunity is not right, like in the ninth step, in the fifth step, or in other steps. And the key is to be ready to do it when the time becomes appropriate and not delude ourselves into thinking, well, I've got to be prudent here before I take any action on this, and I've got to wait for the perfect time. You get yourself ready to do these things so that when the perfect time is there, there's no hesitation, and you don't let it go by. We say this because we are very anxious that we talk to the right person. It is important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully understand and approve what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plans, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we are about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They will be honored by our competence. We pocket our pride and go to it. illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are in the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. And this may or may not happen. If you haven't taken a fifth step yet, I would recommend that you don't set any expectations based upon anything that's written in the book Alcoholics Anonymous or the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Bill makes some mention, but not a promise, that certain things will happen when we have completed the fifth step. If it doesn't mean anything other than it hasn't yet. When I took my first fifth step, I thought something is bad wrong because I don't feel this way. You know, everything I've done in Alcoholics Anonymous in the program has been a hard slugging match. None of this fell out of the sky free for me. I didn't get this feeling of release. I didn't get this nearness to my Creator. I didn't get all these things just because I did something. I had to keep doing these things over and over and over, one day at a time. And these feelings that come to some people very quickly came to me very slowly. You know, just a little piece at a time. And over a long period of time, I got this feeling of completeness and peace that comes over us all if we've done the work. That completes the instructions to Step 5 in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to read Step 5 in the 12 and 12 and see what Bill's commentary is on the instructions. And there's a little bit more information in here that bears reading. It's on page 53. It says all of AA's 12 steps ask us to go contrary to our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. My favorite activity in life is to tell myself that I'm something that I'm not. And if I do these steps, I get a clear picture of who I am. And I don't necessarily like it at the time because of what I meet is a stranger. When it comes to ego deflation, few steps are harder to take than 5. But scarcely any step is more necessary to long-term sobriety and peace of mind than this one. And so until we take the 5th step, what we've done in the 4th step is largely theoretical. You know, it really doesn't make any difference until we get into the 5th step. AA experience has taught us we cannot live alone with our pressing problems and the character defects which cause or aggravate them. If we have swept the searchlight of Step 4 back and forth over our careers, and it has revealed in stark relief those experiences we'd rather not remember, if we have come to know how wrong thinking and action have hurt us and others, then the need to quit living by ourselves with those tormenting ghosts of yesterday gets more urgent than ever. We have to talk to somebody about them. And one of the things that I had become to realize in order to get the completeness back into my life was that, you know, all of these bad things that I had done, that I felt these had these horrible feelings about the guilt and remorse and shame and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, everybody I had done them to was still sucking air. You know, everybody I had done them to really didn't have their lives altered too much. I was an unpleasant experience to a lot of people, perhaps. But life goes on for them. You know, but life wasn't going on for me. So I had to come to know how wrong thinking and action had hurt me. The hell with the other people for right now. What have I done to myself? I'll take care of the other people later. But what have I done to myself? What has the disease done to me? So intense, though, is our fear and reluctance to do this, that many AAs at first try to bypass step 5. We search for an easier way, which usually consists of the general and fairly painless admission that when drinking we were sometimes bad actors. Then, for good measure, we add dramatic descriptions of that part of our drinking behavior, which our friends probably know about anyhow. But of the things which really bother and burn us, we say nothing. The things that make me cringe when I think about them, cringe inside or cringe physically. Certain distressing or humiliating memories we tell ourselves ought not to be shared with anyone. These will remain our secret. Not a soul must ever know. We hope they will go to the grave with us. Yet, if AA experience means anything at all, this is not only unwise, but is actually a perilous resolve. It means I'm putting my life in jeopardy if I take the attitude that my pride, my ego won't allow me to share my deepest, darkest secrets with another human being and God. Where am I? Back on, holding back. Okay, some people are unable to stay sober at all. Others will relapse periodically until they really clean house. Even AA old-timers, sober for years, often pay dearly for skipping this step. They will tell how they tried to carry the load alone, how much they suffered of irritability, anxiety, remorse, and depression. You know, the symptoms of the mental part of the disease. And how unconsciously seeking relief, they would sometimes accuse even their best friends of the very character defects they themselves were trying to conceal. The dry drunkenness, the attitudes of a drunk. I'm okay. Everybody else is causing my problems. They always discovered that relief never came by confessing the sins of other people. Everybody had to confess his own. This practice of admitting one's defects to another person is, of course, very ancient. It has been validated in every century, and it characterizes the lives of all spiritually centered and truly religious people. But today, religion is by no means the sole advocate of this saving principle. Psychiatrists and psychologists point out the deep need every human being has for practical insight and knowledge of his own personality flaws, and for a discussion of them with an understanding and trustworthy person. So, a normal person or a sick person cannot lead a spiritual life unless he comes to know himself with all the pimples and warts. You know, that's what spirituality is about, is being at peace with self so you can be at peace with God and other people. You know, and when I will not admit to myself what's wrong, then I've got to act like nothing's wrong with me. So far as alcoholics are concerned, AA would go even further. Most of us would declare that without a fearless admission of our defects to another human being, we could not stay sober. It seems plain that the grace of God will not enter to expel our destructive obsessions until we are willing to try this. What are we likely to receive from step 5? Well, here we go again with some other suggestions about what the rewards are. For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation we've always had. Almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. And it says in the book, in chapter 11 of the big book, it says that it is a disease of loneliness. It doesn't call it that, but it says we will know loneliness as few do. Loneliness is probably the elemental feeling that I had as a person, that I was all by myself, and there was nobody else that cared about me, regardless of what was going on. But that feeling was caused by bad thinking, that was caused by the disease. Even before our drinking got bad and people began to cut us off, nearly all of us suffered the feeling that we didn't quite belong. I never belonged anywhere. I always felt like I was looking on the outside, looking in, even when I was in the middle of the group. Even though I was laughing and having a good time, maybe, I was always waiting to leave so I could truly be alone. And I didn't have to act like I wasn't alone. And I grew up on a farm, and there weren't any children around for me to play with. And my sister was 5 or 6 years older than me, and she was dealing with a set of problems of her own, and she didn't want anything to do with me. And I spent interminable weeks and months by myself. I was the happiest kid in the world to go to school, so I could have somebody to play with at recess. And I thought, that's what's wrong with me. I got so lonely as a kid. That's what caused all this shit. Then I met some people in Alcoholics Anonymous that grew up with 12 kids in the house and about 150 back in the alley playing in the ash pits, And I thought, no, that's probably not it. He's just like me, and he had different circumstances, and we both turned out the same, and we both felt the same. Either we were shy and dared not draw near others, or we were apt to be noisy good fellows, craving attention and companionship, but never getting it, at least to our way of thinking. There was always that mysterious barrier we could neither surmount nor understand. It was as if we were actors on a stage, suddenly realizing that we did not know a single line of our parts. That's one reason we loved alcohol too well. It did let us act extemporaneously, and that means on the spur of the moment. In other words, if I thought it said it, I'd just go ahead and do it, and I didn't have to think about it. If I want to run my car in the ditch, I'd just run it in. Somebody would pull it out. Whatever popped in my mind, I just thought I could go ahead and do it. But even Bacchus is a Greek or a Roman god of wine, boomeranged on us. We were finally struck down and left in terrified loneliness. When we reached AA and for the first time in our lives stood among people who seemed to understand, the sense of belonging was tremendously exciting. And it truly was for me when I finally made the decision to do what was necessary to save my life. To sit and talk to somebody that understood me was an experience I had never had in my life. I had tried to talk to some friends on some very, very infrequent occasions, sitting in a bar, and I'd say, hey, he says, no, I got problems of my own. And I really don't want to talk about that shit. And I thought, well, there's something wrong with me, because nobody wants to hear about how I want to feel. The problem was I was talking to a drunk. I needed to find a sober drunk to talk to in Alcoholics Anonymous. We thought the isolation problem had been solved, but we soon discovered that while we weren't alone anymore in a social sense, we still suffered many of the old pangs of anxious apartness. Until we had talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing, we still didn't belong. Step 5 was the answer. It was the beginning of the true kinship with man and God. It's the beginning of a new relationship with God, myself, and other people. Because now I know myself a little better. I know that God knows me a little better. And I know there's another human being that knows me a little better. This vital step was also the means by which we began to get the feeling that we could be forgiven no matter what we had thought or done. The feeling that we could be forgiven, and that's forgiven by other people. The feeling that perhaps if I straighten myself out, other people would forgive me for what I had done. Maybe not, but maybe so. Often it was while working on this step with our sponsor or spiritual advisors that we first felt truly able to forgive others, no matter how deeply we felt they had wronged us. I had to forgive others. Because what these books have told me up to this point, that all people did were basically react to what I did. And it says in the third step, so our troubles we felt are basically of our own making. So I had to forgive others for what I either imagined or in fact perceived as a wrong that was done to me. Our moral inventory had persuaded us that all-around forgiveness was desirable, but it was only when we resolutely tackled step 5 that we inwardly knew we would be able to receive forgiveness and give it too. And if you remember last week, I talked about 6 simple tools to put into action in your life, trying to get some discipline into it. I think it was called 6 Tools of Self-Esteem, I think. And 2 of them were forgive self and forgive others. Very important concepts in my life. And the book tells me that that's what is supposed to work as I work these steps. Another great dividend we may expect from confiding our defects to another human being is humility, a word often misunderstood. And I think it was last week we came back here and we read this when we were working on step 4. Maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, but here it is again. To those who have made progress in AA, it amounts to a clear recognition of what and who we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. So, this feeling of humility that I am trying to find within myself is nothing more than a clear recognition of who and what I am. And I'll repeat some of what I've already said about it just for those of you who didn't hear it or forgot it or weren't here. But who and what I am is really quite elemental, very basic. Number 1, I am a human being. And by the very definition of a human being, I come in a flawed package. I am not perfect just because I'm a human being. And the second thing I am, the second most important thing I am after being a human being, is that I am an alcoholic. If I am a drinking alcoholic, alcoholism, the disease, is the most important thing in my life, even before being a human being. Because I don't care whether the disease takes my life or not. If I am a sober alcoholic trying to work these principles, trying to put these principles into action, the most important thing in my life after being a human being is that I am an alcoholic that suffers from the disease of alcoholism. Because I am an alcoholic, I have some responsibilities in life that a normal person does not have. If I want to be a drunk alcoholic, my responsibility is to drink. And anybody that has drank on a serious basis realizes what a job that is. It is probably one of the hardest jobs in life. That's a hell of a responsibility, to drink yourself to death. If I am a sober alcoholic who does not want to drink himself to death, then I am responsible to do things that normal people don't have to do. And I have found in my life, because I was told that if I will accept the responsibilities that I have as an alcoholic and act upon them, that what other responsibilities I may have in my life will pretty much take care of themselves. You know, everything in my life gives me a responsibility. You know, I'm an ex-husband, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a citizen of the United States. I own firearms, I own a stereo, I own an automobile, you know, and I'm a licensed driver. All of those things come to me with responsibilities. But if I meet my responsibilities as an alcoholic, which other people don't have to do, all those other things will and do take care of themselves. You know, because I have the right attitude about them. I have the right thinking about them. And I take the right actions concerning them. Just because I do these things that normal people don't have to do. You know, a normal person doesn't devote the hours that most of us devote to getting well to anything in their life. If they're members of the Rotary Club or whatever, they go to a meeting once a week or once a month or whatever, you know. And they're doing something for themselves spiritually by doing that. If they go to church, they may go to a Bible study on Wednesday night, Vespers, or they might go to church on Sunday, a couple hours a week. You know, I don't know how much time you devote to your life and living with the disease one day at a time, but I know how much time I devote on a daily basis, and I look around the room and I can see what time a lot of other people devote. You know, and I can feel the results that I get by devoting that time, and I can see the results that other people get for devoting that time. So I had to stop feeling sorry for myself because I couldn't act like a normal person. To tell you the truth, I'd rather be home asleep tonight. But my responsibility was to be here. You need to change that. And these kinds of misunderstandings bushwhack people back into the bottle. You know, and until I came to understand these things about what my responsibilities were. You know, I didn't think that I needed to do what you people were telling me to do based upon what was in these books. I thought I could stop drinking, do exactly what I wanted to do, and get different results. And I always ended up drunk. Even though I was come to Alcoholics Anonymous, sitting here and warm in a chair. It didn't seep up into me through my ass. It required something of me. All I wanted to do was get rid of the consequences, you know. But I wanted it to be magic, and we don't have magic pills in Alcoholics Anonymous. The only thing we offer any of our members of the fellowship is hard work. And sometimes it's not fun, and a lot of times it's not easy. And most of the time I don't want to do it. But I have to act upon the responsibilities if I want to save my life. Therefore, our first practical move toward humility must consist of recognizing our deficiencies. No defect can be corrected unless we clearly see what it is, but we shall have to do more than see. The objective look at ourselves we achieved in step 4 was, after all, only a look. All of us saw, for example, that we lacked honesty and tolerance, that we were beset at times by attacks of self-pity or delusions of personal grandeur. But while this was a humiliating experience, it didn't necessarily mean that we had yet acquired much actual humility. Humiliation and humility aren't synonymous. Though now recognized, our defects were still there. Something had to be done about them, and we soon found that we could not wish or will them away by ourselves. Gosh, I'm talking a long time tonight. Hold on, we'll finish in a minute. More realism and therefore more honesty about ourselves are the great gains we make under the influence of step 5. As we took inventory, we began to suspect how much trouble self-delusion had been causing us. And there it is again, the bedrock of the disease, self-delusion. Without self-delusion, there is no disease of alcoholism. I have to be able to tell myself a lie that I can believe in order to practice alcoholism. So the reason for taking step 5 with another human being is to remove self-delusion. When I say something, it becomes more real than when I think it. This had brought a disturbing reflection. If all our lives we had more or less fooled ourselves, how could we now be so sure that we weren't still self-deceived? How could we be certain that we had made a true catalog of our defects and had really admitted them even to ourselves? Because we were still bothered by fear, self-pity, and hurt feelings, it was probable that we couldn't appraise ourselves fairly at all. That's an understatement. Too much guilt and remorse might cause us to dramatize and exaggerate our shortcomings, or anger and hurt pride might be the smokescreen under which we were hiding some of our defects while we blamed others for them. Possibly we were still handicapped by many liabilities, great and small, we never knew we had. And if you remember back in step 4 in this book, it says we first take a look at the most obvious and acutely troublesome. There's a lot of little things that we'll dig out over time, and we try to do as good a job on this first 4 steps as we possibly can, but we're not through with it. Hence, it was most evident that a solitary self-appraisal and the admission of our defects based upon that alone wouldn't be nearly enough. We'd have to have outside help if we were surely to know and admit the truth about ourselves, the help of God and another human being. Only by discussing ourselves, holding back nothing, only by being willing to take advice and accept direction, could we set foot on the road to straight thinking, solid honesty, and genuine humility. If you got your own book, I'd underline that in that sentence. I like it. Yet many of us still hung back. We said, why can't God, as we understand him, tell us where we are astray? If the Creator gave us our lives in the first place, then he must know in every detail where we have gone wrong, since gone wrong. Why don't we make our admissions to him directly? Why do we need to bring anyone else into this? At this stage, the difficulties of trying to deal rightly with God by ourselves are twofold. Though we may at first be startled to realize that God knows all about us, we are apt to get used to that quite quickly. Somehow being alone with God doesn't seem as embarrassing as facing up to another person until we actually sit down and talk aloud about what we have so long hidden. Our willingness to clean house is still largely theoretical. When we are honest with another person, it confirms that we have been honest with ourselves and with God. That's all the fifth step is. It's check on my honesty. Well, that's all the other person involved in the fifth step is to check on my honesty. The second difficulty is this. What comes to us alone may be garbled by our own rationalization and wishful thinking. The benefit of talking to another person is that we can get his direct comment and counsel on our situation. And there can be no doubt in our minds what that advice is. Here it is. Going it alone in spiritual matters is dangerous. I can't think my way out of a wet paper bag on spiritual matters or much of anything else. That's the only reason why I come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. If I could ever learn how to think, I wouldn't fit in here and I'd stop coming. Just something broke in my head. How many times have we heard well-intentioned people claim the guidance of God when it was all too plain that they were sorely mistaken? Lacking both practice and humility, they had deluded themselves and were able to justify the most arrant nonsense on the ground that this was what God had told them. It is worth noting that people of very high spiritual development almost always insist on checking with friends or spiritual advisors the guidance they feel they have received from God. Surely then a novice ought not lay himself open to the chance of making foolish, perhaps tragic blunders in this fashion. While the comment or advice of others may be by no means infallible, it is likely to be far more specific than any direct guidance we may receive while we are still so inexperienced in establishing contact with a power greater than ourselves. Our next problem will be to discover the person in whom we are able to confide. Here we ought to take much care, remembering that prudence is a virtue which carries a high rating. What it means is be careful about who you tell some things about yourself that you do not want known. You know, I didn't get sober to get stupid. I need to use some prudence. Perhaps we need to share with this person facts about ourselves which no other ought to know. We shall want to speak with someone who is experienced, who not only has stayed dry but has been able to surmount other serious difficulties perhaps like our own. This person may turn out to be one's sponsor, but not necessarily so. If you have developed a high confidence in him and his temperament and problems are close to your own, then such a choice will be good. Besides, your sponsor already has the advantage of knowing something about your case. Perhaps, though, your relation to him is such that you would care to reveal only a part of your story. If this is a situation, by all means do so, for you ought to make a beginning as soon as you can. It may turn out, however, that you will choose someone else for the more difficult and deeper revelations. This individual may be entirely outside of AA, for example, your clergyman or your doctor. For some of us, a complete stranger may prove the best bet. The real test of the situation are your own willingness to confide and your full confidence in the one with whom to share your first accurate self-survey. Even when you found the person, it frequently takes great resolution to approach him or her. No one ought to say the AA program requires no willpower. Here is one place you may require all you got. And many places in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous requires tremendous willpower. And what these books are about is the proper use of that willpower. Happily, though, the chances are that you will be in for a very pleasant surprise. When your mission is carefully explained and it is seen by the recipient of your confidence how helpful he can really be, the conversation will start easily and will soon become eager. Before long, your listener may well tell a story or two about himself which will place you even more at ease. Provided you hold back nothing, your sense of relief will mount from minute to minute. The dammed up emotions of years break out of their confinement and miraculously vanish as soon as they are exposed. As the pain subsides, a healing tranquility takes its place, and when humility and serenity are so combined, something else of great moment is apt to occur. Many in AA, once agnostic or atheist, tells us that it was during this stage of step 5 that he first actually felt the presence of God. And even those who had faith already often became conscious of God as they never were before. This feeling of being at one with man and God, this emerging from isolation through the open and honest sharing of our terrible burden of guilt, brings us to a resting place where we may prepare ourselves for the following steps toward a full and meaningful sobriety. And I thank you very much for listening.